What are you going to do if, say, subversive infiltrators from the United Nations are coming to your state and trying to make deals? Are you going to you can be polite and professional and civil with them while they're here in person, but are you going to sit down and have a dialogue and let them be subversive and let them start infiltrating? Hey, let's give you an office. Let's get you set up here.
The leadership of the church in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s would before the UN, and when the UN came out, they slammed it. They said it was a satanic organization, they slammed communism, said it was satanic, and I mean, they were so fiery for freedom. I mean, this is the one state that I would say in the, before the, 80s, 90s, was if there was one state that bled red, white, and blue, it was Utah.
Fast forward to just a few months ago, they're meeting with the church leaders here. So flashing back to what you were saying earlier, where the church was calling the UN evil 40 plus years ago, we're now literally inviting them in the doors.
Dr. James Lindsay is his name, and he is speaking in this particular video podcast to We Are the People, and they are based out of Utah. They're all about Utah. And actually, I think they're members of the church, because as I listen to them, they sound like they are. They're very conservative, and I mean that in the good sense of the word conservative. They're not, they're good people, and they want what's right for America and for Utah. Well, this is Dr. James Lindsay. Dr. Lindsay is professionally known as James A. Lindsay. He's an American author, cultural critic, mathematician, and conspiracy theorist. That last part is thrown in by Wikipedia. He is known for the Grievance Studies affair. I have where he's talking about it, which he and Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose submitted hoax articles to academic journals in 2017 and 2018 to test scholarship and rigor in several academic fields. Dr. Lindsay has written several books, including Cynical Theories, 2020, which he co-authored with Pluckrose. And he knows his stuff when it comes to critical race theory. He's amazing. And I'm not sure if maybe Quick Media had him on or talked about him before. But if he hasn't, definitely should have him on. He definitely should have him on. And I think I might try as well. But here we go. I will be commenting and adding my own dialogue. I went through this with a fine-tooth comb and picked out the very best parts that I think that would be highlighted in our minds and in our hearts, what we think is important, especially living in Utah. And what you're going to understand and realize is that politics in Utah, as conservative as it appears, is very, very complex, very strange. Let's get into it.
Your state is worse than you think it is. I go around this country telling people that Utah is the fakest red state, and I mean it. I've visited a lot of red states, a lot of blue states, and a lot of purple states. The best fights in the purple ones. The fighters in the blue states are an inspiration to all of us. We should be backing them up. But these red states get very sleepy, very complacent. I'm talking Idaho. I'm talking Tennessee. I'm talking even Florida to a degree. I'm talking Oklahoma. Everybody claims they're the reddest state. Utah claims it's the reddest state, and I'll tell you, you're way too asleep. It is much worse and much more important in Utah than you know. Your politicians are not doing you right, and it's time for you to start getting really clear, and it's time to speak up, time to get organized, get smart, understand the issues, and get off the couch and show up. And then don't get discouraged. Don't quit. They're going to come after you. They're not going to like it. They're not going to give you an inch of ground back. So don't quit. They're going to make you feel like, oh, well, I can't do anything about it. No, you've got to do something about it. Talking about our kids. We're talking about your grandkids. You're talking about the future of the country. You're talking about watching them fall into possibly permanent digital slavery, which I can't imagine anybody wanting. And Utah happens to be, very unfortunately, for whatever set of reasons, the place where it's supposed to start. So a lot falls on you. A lot is asked of you. But I also think, having met many of you now and seen what you're made of here, I think you're actually there for the challenge.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think about that? Do you think it's hogwash? Do you think that Utah is already a very conservative state and that you guys are doing okay? I don't live in Utah, so that's why I'm saying you guys. I live in California. Is he right? Let's listen to him. Let's hear what he has to say. This next clip, he talks about this college experiment. As he was a professor, he did this with a few other people, where they wrote these fake woke papers, the hoax articles that I was talking about earlier, to academic journals in 2017 and in 2018 to test scholarship and rigor in several academic fields. It's hilarious. Check this out.
I think you rose to fame for your research papers. I got a little bit of an eye roll on that one, which I guess Wikipedia likes to call your grievance study papers. And I'm just going to make some stuff up as we go along. So the grievance studies affair, is that a Wikipedia term for it, or is that a real term?
That's the real term for it.
That's the real term for it. Where you did some fake hoax research papers.
That's right.
Submitted them, and then, like typical academia.
Yeah, so we had to show that academia is full of fraud. So we wrote a whole bunch of fake academic articles, made them as ridiculous and stupid as we possibly could. Funny, scary, terrifying, whatever you want. And we submitted them to high-ranking journals. We actually wrote 20 of them. And by the time we ended up, the Wall Street Journal caught us, and we had to stop early. We'd had 7 of them accepted for publication, including one that was a rewrite of a chapter of Hitler's Mein Kampf as feminism. So we made Rush Limbaugh's old joke about feminazis come true, and they accepted it in a social work journal. And then we had some other ones. We had 7 accepted. One of them won an award for excellence in scholarship. So we really just showed that the peer review process in academia is as corrupt as the peers involved, and therefore that there's a huge political corruption problem in the stuff academia produces. So when they say there's a study that proves whatever they want to run, how do you know it's true?
So the cool thing about that, it wasn't just funny, it was real. And a lot of these experiments that they did, these fake term papers or academic papers, whatever you want to call them, they were submitted and reviewed and accepted, and they were absurd, which just goes to show you how we talk about how absurd this woke culture is, and that oftentimes it does not make sense. Well, that is there. You're going to find out later. He talks about that being a calculated, it's on purpose, and it's to divide us, and it's to cause cognitive dissonance. It's to cause this split in our morale, our psyche, whatever you used to think was real and legit, and these were my standards and my values, that gets split and torn. It goes back to, and I'm jumping the gun here, but it goes back to Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and then this other book that he'll talk about later, Beautiful Troubles, Dividing and Conquering 101. But about these papers that he talks about being submitted, you could get doctorates for some of these. They would award people, and they still do today. So someone that says, oh, this is Dr. So-and-so, and they have a doctorate in this. It depends on what group you were submitting your paperwork to, your study. But a lot of times if they liked what you had to say, you would be awarded some sort of like honorary degree or get your doctorate through it's crazy. It's really crazy. James wasn't always conservative.
Well, what I find most fascinating about you is you actually started as a leftist professor, and classically went through the whole system.
Yeah.
And came out indoctrinated on the other end, and still found the light.
Well, yeah, the woke stuff really never jived with me. I always thought that was really crazy, and the fact that they were like silencing, they're like, oh, we have to listen to everybody's story. Then there's all these stories they wouldn't listen to, they didn't want to hear it. So I realized there was some kind of bias. I never jived with that side of stuff. I just thought, well, taxes are okay, and, kind of stupid old school Democrat stuff, right? And then this woke stuff really woke me up. And I said, this is a genocide in the making, and if we don't speak up about it, we're going to lose our country. So I asked my wife, can I quit my job, dedicate my life full-time to studying this? She's like, you've lost your marbles. And then she was more practical. She said, can you make money doing that? I said, I don't know. We'll find out. So here we are. The answer was yes, I can. And we got the plane off the ground, and been exposing it ever since.
Utah more woke than Massachusetts.
Well, you've welcomed to the capital of woke of America, Utah.
And you'd never expect it to be, though.
Right.
No, it's up there, though. You would think, oh, it's Massachusetts, real bad. Vermont, real bad. California, Washington, Oregon, that's like one unistate of terrible. Minnesota, surprisingly bad. Illinois. You'd think, well, the problem is that Utah is the fakest red state in the nation. I told you in the car, I say that everywhere I go. It's the fakest red state in the nation.
Are any of you offended by now? Well, let's take a look at it one increment at a time. Let's find out what he means by that, okay? Before we get anything into a bunch. What does James mean by the fakest conservative state in the nation? What does he mean? It's complicated here, and I believe what he's going to get into, one of the reasons is we have a church, and a lot of people don't understand this, where it was 100% conservative. We still have Republicans that are morally conservative, and then we have members of the church that are morally conservative and fiscally liberal. We have members of the church that are fiscally conservative, morally liberal, and then some in between. Wokeism got into the church, so you have the gospel of Jesus Christ, like we've heard progmos and desnats and things like that. It's a very complicated culture here, and it's not like any other. Let's hear what he has to say.
What's kind of been your impression as the more you've dug into Utah? Tell us your thoughts on your
Because
experience
you've
you've
been spending
had.
a lot of time here lately. So.
I have been here a number of times, actually. 7 or 8 times, I think, I've been to Utah now. So getting to be a friend of the state, or the state's being a bit of a friend to me. First of all, I will say that the people here are extraordinary. They're very welcoming. They're very kind, and I mean that in the good sense, but we'll have to talk about the other side of that too. It's a genuinely warm and welcoming state to come
Absolutely.
to. It's, of course, beautiful geographically. Natural beauty is off the charts. What I found is that the politics in Utah are ugly, though.
Yeah.
Real ugly. Like, you would think not real ugly. I thought not real.
Did it surprise you?
Shocked me, absolutely. I came out here thinking, well, this is a strong conservative bastion, blah, blah, blah. Start talking to people, start listening to what's going on with the politics, and there's just, how is this possible
Right.
here? Just, it utterly floored me.
Well, it was at one time a righteous place to be overall, like 95% righteous. And when I say conservative, yes, it was actually a popular thing to say that Jesus Christ was not a liberal. Harold B. Lee, like today we go conservative. Well, we shouldn't mix that with the gospel, but you're mixing politics and ideology has nothing to do with righteousness. Yeah, it does. Look at most of your conservatives. They keep the commandments. The commandments are the laws of the land. That you pretty much put them together and they're kind of related. Okay? And conservatives believe in we believe in freedom, but we don't believe in doing whatever the hell you want to do, okay? We believe in keeping the laws of the land and keeping commandments. There was a time where Harold B. Lee would get up and give speeches at General Conference about liberalism being satanic. Brigham Young was concerned with materialism, that the saints would become too prosperous. President Packer said that the choice between good and evil, and that is a very different matter indeed. When we finally understand this lesson, thereafter, our happiness will not be determined by material things. We may be happy without them or successful in spite of them. And that is the big test that Brigham Young said that the saints would have, is prosperity. And so what do you do when the Gadianton robbers come in or the United Nations come in and want to set up office and tell you that you can prosper, but you've got to compromise some of your standards? And they don't spell it out in black and white, but that's usually what ends up happening, is that there's compromise with the cloak and daggers. And people want to still play the righteous role. They want their cake and eat it too. They want Babylon and Zion. You can't serve man and God. Go back way in translation. It says you can't serve Moloch and God at the same time. You can't serve Baal and God at the same time. President Ballard stated, instead of wealth and comfort, I like to think of the promise of prosperity to the righteous in terms of being favored of the Lord. Nephi was highly favored of the Lord in his afflictions as well as his times of comfort.
One of the things that's interesting is my wife grew up in New York City, then Miami, and then we came here together. And obviously very politically fired up. And I was so excited to bring her out here in 2017. I mean, this is the one state that the predominant religion believes the Constitution is literally inspired by God. It is in their scripture about that Constitution being an inspired document.
Yeah.
And historically, the leadership of the church in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s would before the UN, and when the UN came out, they slammed it. They said it was a satanic organization. They slammed communism, said it was satanic, and I mean they were so fiery for freedom. I mean, this is the one state that I would say in the before the 80s 90s was, if there was one state that bled red, white, and blue, it was Utah.
Yeah, well, they were right about the United Nations, that's for sure. Back in the day, I don't know what's happened since, but it's like, for example, you have this governor. He used his pronouns. It's turned into like a national punchline. I tried to help popularize that when it happened.
Thank you. Keep doing it.
Yeah, Governor Spencer Cox, he, him. I don't want to get those confused. You might not be a he,
you can't
they.
tell sometimes.
But we were watching that. You showed me a video of him earlier today, and we were watching it. And what I told you, my first reaction, if I didn't know who it was, of course.
Can we play that video?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Spencer Cox, Governor of Utah and Chairman of the National Governors Association. You and I probably disagree on a few things, and that's okay. It's actually good for us, but it's way too easy to let our differences become toxic. Our country is deeply divided, and most Americans are tired of the division. Disagreeing better, not disagreeing less, is the answer. When we engage in healthy, honest dialogue, we avoid demonizing others, and we're more likely to find solutions. And I'm not just talking about civility. Being nicer is important, but I'm talking about learning the right kind of conflict. Instead of calling names, be curious. Listen more. Attack ideas, not people. Treating each other with respect and dignity instead of contempt can be hard, and I don't always get it right. But over the next year, I'm hoping we can work together to do better. Democrats and Republicans, liberals, conservatives, and everything in between. Please join us. And remember, nothing is less American than hating our fellow Americans. But harnessing our differences to get things done, that's as American as it gets.
If I didn't know who Spencer Cox was, so I do, but I just tried to go, let's just watch this, see what's there. The first thing I thought was, who's this Democrat?
From watching that video.
Just the video. Oh, we have to be more civil. Let's not demonize each other. We have to engage better. And then we go back, just what we were just talking about a minute ago, when, 70s, 80s, whatever, with the LDS Church saying that the United Nations was a satanic organization. Okay, and I say, well, they had that right. What are you going to do if, say, subversive infiltrators from the United Nations are coming to your state and trying to make deals? Are you going to you can be polite and professional and, civil with them while they're here in person, but are you going to sit down and have a dialogue and let them be subversive and let them start infiltrating? Hey, let's give you an office. Let's get you set up here. Let's be real generous to you with, time and all. No, of course you wouldn't. If you genuinely thought, let's take the United Nations out of it. If you genuinely thought it was a all-out satanic organization that that their agenda is to be subversive, you cannot do that with a subversive agenda, because what it's doing is using that claim to niceness, that claim to civility, to better dialogue, to hear me out, bro, kind of vibe, to bring their ideas in where they should not be allowed in. It's not a matter, when you're dealing with something that's subversive, it's not a matter of an actual dialogue. The point, if I was going to be subversive, is to seduce you into buying a little bit of whatever I'm selling. And now I've got you hooked a little bit, and then I try to get you to take another step and another step, and maybe you take one step at a time, but before you know it, you've walked 5 miles down the road and you don't know how you got there.
You guys know who Yuri Bezmenov is, right? He was a former KGB spy for the Soviet Union. He defected to the United States, and he talked about ideological subversion. And he said, one of the things he said about it, I was going to play the video, but it's pretty lengthy. This is about James and not Yuri. He said, quote, "You can see it with your own eyes," he said. The American media would be able to see it if it just focused on it. He said, what it basically means, the subversion, is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. Even if you're raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, even if you were raised in Utah, and it's a great brainwashing.
Maybe everybody hasn't, but most people have heard of Rules for Radicals. There's an updated guidebook. Yeah, Saul Alinsky wrote that, which, by the way, if you didn't know, he dedicated that book to Lucifer.
Satan, yeah.
Literally dedicated it to him. Well, there's an updated version of that book. It's available online. It's free. It's called Beautiful Trouble. BeautifulTrouble.org is the website. You can read the whole book for free online. You don't have to buy anything. And it has all their strategies. It has all their goals. And one of them is escalate strategically. So you start with a little bit and you make it, you take them to one step and they accept the one step. You take them a second step, they accept the second step. And like I said, before they know it, they're 5 miles down the road. And then when you say, whoa, anal leakage at BYU, that's a bridge too far. We're done. Back up the truck. They're like, you're transphobic. They throw a giant fit. It turns into this huge mess. And now you've got a year and a half, or maybe if it's the United Nations, 30 years, 50 years of letting that in. And all of a sudden that's not legitimate anymore. And you've got to fight its way back out. And they throw a giant fit. They're not going to give an inch of ground back. So you've given away miles and miles of ground and they're not going to give it back. And so the conflict is going to get worse. So this video with Spencer, what I hear what I hear him doing is saying, I feel like he's a very subversive entity personally, having watched a little bit of his stuff, seen what he's done. This Governor's Association he's a part of is a captured organization, in my opinion. And so he's subverting Utah step by step by step by step. And now he's getting called on it.
Tell our listeners who aren't familiar with subversion, tell us what you mean by that, subverting Utah.
So subversion is where you're going to come in, get inside an organization, and what you do is you twist the values just a little bit. You don't throw the values out. You don't say, well, we have these values, say, from the Bible, right? Love thy neighbor. That's a very, very big picture value that most Americans actually accept, right? Well, all of a sudden, you don't come in and you say, we're not going to love our neighbor anymore. That's not subversion. What you're going to say is, well, did you know when they say love thy neighbor, here's what it really means. You think it means this, tell them the truth, love them, go kindly, but be real with them so they don't step into, say, enablement or, you're not... Being too kind to somebody who's on heroin is not actually helping them. You've got to tell them the truth at some point. You got to throw the cold water on their face. Well, it's coming in and saying, well, maybe what loving your neighbor means is wearing a mask. Maybe loving your neighbor means stay home and don't visit your parents in case you get them sick. So you take the value and you change the meaning of the value a little bit. And then when everybody kind of settles into this new meaning, you twist it a little further and you twist it a little further and you twist it a little further. That's in fact what the video is doing explicitly. Hey, we have a value here in Utah of niceness, of kindness. Let's be kind, right? That's a thing here.
Or not be contentious. That's the big thing right now is we don't want to be contentious.
Yeah, we're going to be
let's
not just even civil. We're going to disagree better. And it's going to make us better people. So what that means is don't call me out. But that's not what it means. That's a subverted meaning. So subversion means that you're going to take the values and you're going to twist them a little bit at a time so that the people that hold those values will hold to their values, but are starting to do the wrong thing. There's actually like a biblical thing about this with the bent rod, right? So, and how do you tell when a bent rod is bent? You have to have a true rod, a straight rod. And so what they're doing is making you lose sight of the true rod and slowly twisting your values so they take you off in the wrong direction. That's subversion.
Spencer W. Kimball stated that the arch deceiver has studied every way possible to achieve his ends, using every tool, every device possible. He takes over, distorts, and changes and camouflages everything created for the good of man. So he may take over their minds and pervert their bodies and claim them his. Remember, property, human beings as property, is his objective. Spencer W. Kimball also stated that it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the devil to enter a door that is closed. He seems to have no keys for locked doors, but if a door is slightly ajar, he gets his toe in. And soon this is followed by his foot, then by his leg and his body and his head, and finally he is all the way in.
I was a little taken aback by how many flags there were flying everywhere. It's like every other business, especially when we drove around and went to lunch here down in Salt Lake, and I was like, what? Why? Utah? Really?
And it's because they say, well, we want to show that we're welcoming.
it's
and
the
that's
tolerant
right.
and
That's
loving.
right.
It's the subversion of love thy neighbor.
It is.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is. So this is a state that I can tell you from every interaction I've had with a person in this state so far, every single
Good.
one, is that this is a values-driven state. This is a state that's rooted in values, rooted in morals, rooted in family. It's deep, deep, deep. You can tell when you're here. I go to all the states, actually not quite. I've been to 42 of them. And there's a different vibe in every state for sure. And that is unmistakable here in Utah. And so the only way that state could have got from there to here is if those values got turned against them and subverted like that. And it is. It's a perversion of love thy neighbor.
Here's a fable from Spencer W. Kimball. Obviously, he's one of my favorite prophets, and he is. Ezra Taft Benson, Joseph Fielding Smith, Spencer W. Kimball. I love all of them, but those are my top dogs right there. The fable goes like this. A camel and his owner who were traveling across the desert and dunes when a windstorm came up. The traveler quickly set up his tent and moved in, closing the flaps to protect himself from the cutting, grinding sands of the raging storm. I know a lot of you probably know this. The camel was, of course, left outside, and as the violent wind hurled the sand against his body and into his eyes and nostrils, he found it unbearable and finally begged for entrance into the tent. "There is room only for myself," said the traveler, "but may I just get my nose in so I can breathe air not filled with sand?" asked the camel. "Well, perhaps you could do that," replied the traveler, and he opened the flap ever so little, and the long nose of the camel entered. How comfortable the camel was now! But soon the camel became weary of the smarting sand on his eyes and ears. "The wind-driven sand is like a rasp on my head. Could I put just my head in?" Again, the traveler rationalized that to acquiesce would do him no damage, for the camel's head could occupy the space at the top of the tent, which he himself was not using. So the camel put his head inside, and the beast was satisfied again, but for a short while only. "Just the front quarters," he begged, and again the traveler relented, and soon the camel's front shoulders and legs were in the tent. Finally, by the same processes of pleading and of yielding, the camel's torso, his hind quarters, and all were in the tent. But now it was too crowded for the two, and the camel kicked the traveler out into the windstorm. Like the camel, Lucifer readily becomes the master when one succumbs to his initial blandishments. Soon then the conscience is stilled completely. The evil power has full sway, and the door to salvation is closed until a thorough repentance opens up again. So this was accommodation. This is allowing subversion, and it doesn't happen all at once. It's like the frog in the hot water, right? You could look at it as like temptations, enticings. How does the devil get in? How does this subversion happen? Let's go on. Oh, and one other thing. Going back to Yuri Bezmenov, the demoralization process is a process that is irreversible. Bezmenov actually thought back in 1984 that the process of demoralizing America was already completed, and that was back in 1984. He said, "I would take another generation." He said it would take another generation and another couple of decades to get the people to think differently and return to their patriotic American values. Which is interesting because you think of today's September 11th. Didn't we become more patriotic? Well, it was only for a moment. And then who comes around? It's Obama. And he did completely opposite. he got people to hate America. So he that was a big reversing that happened right there.
And by the way, it's Maoist. If you don't know that this is Maoist, Mao had a formula that he used to transform China. That formula was unity, criticism, unity. We're going to start, he said, with a desire for unity, then we'll teach people the real basis for right and wrong through criticism and struggle. So we'll tell people that they're not living up to the expectations. And then we can arrive, he said, at a new unity on a new basis. And we'll have a new unified culture under a new standard that's higher and better and whatever. And so what he would do is he would literally, if we translate that into the language of today, is he just wants to make a state where everybody feels like they're included. Just wants everybody to feel like they belong. It's very important that everybody's welcome. But the problem is, Jason, is people like you have attitudes that make it so some people can't feel welcome. You're systemically racist. You're systemically homophobic.
Mean is the word they use for us.
Mean you guys are mean. It's good for your brand, or whatever, as the governor said. So him. It's like the Muslim thing, like peace be upon him, but it's him for Spencer Cox. And every time you say his name. So what they've done though is there's people who in this state are a problem. They aren't welcoming. They aren't loving. They don't allow people to feel like they belong, and their values have kind of gotten in the way. So the values must have been misinterpreted. Let's give you a new interpretation of those, and inch by inch by inch by inch. The next thing you know, they flip the thing over.
Listen to the hosts as well to this program. They are very intelligent. Listen to what they have to say, including James, about the United Nations and their relationship specifically with Utah.
Lexi always brings up the point is when you capture a nation, the first thing you do is you bring down the flag and you put up a new flag.
Oh, of course.
And when you look at the United Nations relationships with Utah, I find it fascinating that the only place the United Nations meets outside of New York City in America is Utah.
And when they first came here, they set up at the Salt Palace and then they just never left. No. Fast forward to just a few months ago, they're meeting with the church leaders here. So flashing back to what you were saying earlier, where the church was calling the UN evil 40 plus years ago, we're now literally inviting them in the doors.
Now, I had to stop right there because I understand the leaders of the church today have to be apolitical. They obviously are. It's in the church handbook about leaders. It does say that stake presidents and bishops can get involved more politically than they can. But yeah, they're pretty much out of the picture as far as them being a global church now. But they haven't stopped encouraging us to get involved. Listen to them at the pulpit. Listen to Elder Christofferson. Listen to them. Listen to Elder Ballard. They know who the cloak and daggers are. They get it. They understand. They were raised with those other fellows that used to talk about those things. So I think that the United Nations, they've got to do some kind of diplomacy there. Are we, there's an old saying with gangsters, old-time gangsters, and some newbies, that you keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, in a sense. Or Christ even said, when you're in the way of your enemy, agree with them. Maybe that might be what's going on, but I digress.
Yeah, welcoming in.
The World Economic Forum is is deep in Utah, so it just feels like we've been so encaptured by these. We're turning such a globalist state.